We're going to begin the session now where the debaters address one another and also take questions from you, the audience. And again, I would very much encourage any of you who are here to participate. If you have expertise in the field, that is so much the better. Again, we would encourage you to keep your questions exceedingly short. What you need to do is raise your hand, and we have ushers who are moving around the aisles and will come to you and locate you. But I just want to, I want to go to John Lott, who, in a sense, your work embodies this motion that guns reduce crime, and your statistical work embodies that motion. And yet tonight, I heard some of the fundamental work you've done referred to as a fantasy, and I heard the question raised by Mayor Helmke, former Mayor Helmke, if guns prevent crime, why isn't this the most safe nation in the world? What is the answer to that, and what about the fantasy issue?
There are lots of academics who have looked at the relationship between concealed handgun laws and crime rates. And if you look at papers published in rough-read academic journals by economists and criminologists, you'll find about 70% of them find that when right-to-carry laws get passed, there's drops in violent crime rates. About 30% say there's no change that's there. And then there's no one, not one rough-read academic journal that I know of, that finds that there's a bad effect from these. So there's a lot of people that have looked at this in many different ways.
John, you're ignoring the National Academy of Science panel.
I'm happy to get
15 to 1, including some of the top econometricians
right
in the country, and their conclusion was your work is not supported by the scientific evidence.
Yeah, John's talking about what experts thought.
Yeah, but the problem is...
And the real debate is simply between people who say there is a beneficial effect versus those who say there's no effect. There basically is no participation on John's side, on John Donahue's side. Basically, there is no support for the view it has counterproductive violence elevating effects.
But just to respond to the National Academy of Sciences, I mean, unfortunately, I think there's a problem with government getting involved in evaluating research, and that's very hard for the government to keep politics out of it. This was a panel set up by the Clinton administration. I don't think it was unbiased.
This was not a panel set up.
It was started there. But the point is, what James Q. Wilson, who's this hack that you were referring to, and I think a lot of people would regard James Q. Wilson as probably the top criminologist in the country. He was the person who was dissenting on this. And what Jim showed was that if you look at every single one of the National Academy of Sciences estimates on the impact of right-to-carry laws on murder rates, every single one of their own estimates showed that right-to-carry laws reduced murder rates. And if you looked at their other things, virtually all their other estimates for all the other types of crimes showed reductions in those other.
John,
there was no estimate, not one estimate.
I have the report right in front of me, and it does not support what you just said.
Is it true or is it not true that every regression, every estimate that they had on right to carry and murder showed a drop? Is there one estimate that they showed it didn't fall?
Yeah,
statistically?
there are some, maybe not statistically significant, but but the bottom line, John, is, as the panel suggested, the elephant in the room was crack cocaine. The states that did not pass the right-to-carry laws were states that had a big problem with crack cocaine, which had an enormous influence in running up crime. The rural states that did pass these laws did not experience the big run-up in crime. And when you do your analysis, it is the difference between the flat performance in the rural states and the increases in crime that generates that result. That's why James Q. Wilson was outvoted 15 to 1.
Okay, I think we have impasse on this. And I want to go to Chief Kerilikowske, Seattle Police Chief, because you were talking about British bobbies being unarmed and preferring that in many situations because they felt being armed would invite assault. And yet Gary Kleck, arguing for the motion, said, why are police armed in the first place unless it is to deter assault? Chief, can you take that on?
Yes, I can. And remember what Truman said about if I could line up all the economists end to end, wouldn't that be a beautiful sight? So, and one is on my panel. So, getting away from the statistics and going to the police officers are highly trained with firearms. They practice and qualify. They can't graduate from the academy without qualifying. without question, they can use the gun in a defensive mode. But when you look at the numbers of assaults on police officers in the United States, and I remember, I can picture every moment to this day of the first time I had an officer killed in the line of duty. Young, bright, talented, incredible shape, shot 13 times with his own handgun. Wasn't a question of training, wasn't a question of anything else. Officers are routinely wounded and assaulted with their own guns. That's why.
Not true. That's absolutely not true.
Officers are routinely assaulted.
It's an incredibly rare event.
Gary Kleck is
objecting,
but Gary, hold on.
There was an entire reason that the entire gun industry made significant changes in holsters. It used to be that we all wanted the quick draw holster. How fast could we get the holster out? Now the holsters are designed, they're cumbersome, they're heavy, they are not quick draw, and they are designed and sold by the millions across this country for one reason, and that is because of officers having the gun taken from them.
You know, here's a number for you, and it's a very easy number to understand. For the most recent year for which we have data, in the entire United States, there was exactly one police officer killed with his own gun. One. It is. You can stretch the concept. Happens routinely quite a bit, but I don't think one out of 600,000 police officers in the entire United States can really be described as routine. That's some indication of the chief's credibility when he says something happens frequently or routinely. 1 in 600,000 is not routine.
You left out the number of officers.
And what he also fails to point out is that police officers, in fact, are not assaulted anywhere near as often as civilians, and he's right. There's a very straightforward reason. They're all armed with firearms and trained.
Chief, let the chief respond. That was quite direct.
I mean, actually, you'd have to be pretty stupid to assault an armed police officer who has a baton, a uniform, a radio, a gun, pepper spray, and extra ammunition, and is wearing body armor. That probably is quite correct. But there are very few, because of body armor and the changes in body armor in this country, there are very few police officers now killed or wounded in the line of duty at the numbers that we used to see. So to say, yes, 1 out of what 45 officers killed, shot?
There were never many, even 20 years ago or 30 years ago, before the advent of body armor. It was no more true then than now. It's simply untrue.
5 a year or so, even in the high years, that is. Look, I'm 5. It'd be better if it was 0. But if you look at the number of police officers who are assaulted in a year, you're talking about between 16 and 20,000. And so if you're asking what's the rate of a police officer who's assaulted, who's going to lose control of his weapon and have it used against him, and going to result in his death, it's a tiny number. But even more important, I think, to make is a comparison to civilians, because that's partly the motivation for this. And police officers have a much more difficult job than civilians do. A police officer can't brandish a gun, watch the criminal run away, and be satisfied that his job's over with. He has to come into physical contact with the criminal, and you're much more likely to have something go wrong. One of the benefits that a civilian has, if you take a right to carry class to get your permit someplace, one of the things they're going to tell you is you're not the police. Your job isn't to go and arrest people. The benefit that you have of having a gun is to maximize the distance between yourself and the criminal. If he runs away, that's basically what you're done with, and that's the reason why you had the gun.